Welcome to Space to Lead, the podcast where leaders and teams come together to learn, grow, and thrive. I'm your host, David LeBlanc, and every episode will explore fresh insights and strategies that inspire leaders to create dynamic, engaging cultures. We'll dive into conversations with leaders and industry experts who are transforming teams and shaping the future of leadership. Whether you're leading from the front or working within a team, Space to Lead is here to spark ideas and help you lead with purpose and passion. So, take a deep breath, make some space, and let's lead together. In this episode of Space to Lead, we are speaking with Carlos Cadogan. Carlos is a leader who is passionate when it comes to not only surviving, but thriving in a culturally complex environment. He has dedicated his career to his own growth and development, and more importantly, to making an impact on teams, organizations, and the communities he is a part of. Carlos, it is so great to have you with us today.
Awesome. No, thanks. It's great to be here. Thanks,
Excellent.
David.
We've had some really great conversations, and I've really enjoyed the articles that you've been sharing on Team Shift magazine, and really been looking forward to having some time to chat today. I know that you've talked a lot about, leadership, leaders looking after themselves, and this idea that we're experiencing a lot of change, particularly over the last couple of years, and it can be challenging for leaders. So I'd love to dive into that.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, first of all, I don't know if it comes from my sports. I don't know if it comes from my upbringing, but I've always been interested in leadership and mentorship and what that means. When I first started kind of my adult life, my career, I really fell in love with emotional intelligence and leadership and things like that, those competencies, because it gave me language and frameworks of the way that I wanted to show up for people and how I wanted leaders to show up for me. But there was always this missing piece for me as I was kind of going through my work life, and I experienced some things, generational, locations, cultural, whatnot, of how do you effectively manage all that? You fast forward now to the pandemic and to where we live now, and with all the generations in the workforce, I feel as leaders, they got the hardest job and not a lot of time, and they're trying to find ways to navigate. And so for me, I always had this itch of inclusivity and how to make people feel more included and to work and live together better. But I really honed that into leadership. And so for me, the last 5 years, I've been really trying to spend a lot of time helping leaders understand how to effectively work and communicate and collaborate with people who may not look like themselves.
Yeah, I love that. And I mean, what a timely topic given the title of the podcast, Space to Lead, because it's so challenging to create space to figure all that kind of stuff out because it's complex, it's messy. We've got, our jobs, families, community, all these things that we're responsible for. So where do you go from here?
Yeah, it's a great question. Yeah, and that's exactly it. And where do you go from there? And with all the time restraints and responsibilities you have as a leader, yeah, like you mentioned, it's not just I'm leading at this organization. I'm probably a co-leader or a leader in my household, and I have a lot of things going in my life. So how do you start? And I think like most things, it just starts with education and self-awareness. And so, if I could talk a little bit about what we do, we really try to help individuals become, if I can bookend it, what we do is help leaders become more curious and empathetic, and right. And so, curious, which means, trying to understand what's going on here, whether that's through my own emotions or decisions I'm making, or what am I feeling right now, or what are my thought processes saying, like, why am I thinking this? Or why is this person, reacting this way, or why is this situation the way that it is, instead of just leaning in and defining it without some further thought. And then empathy, which is not sympathy, it's not agreeing with somebody, it's not consoling them, it's perspective taking. It's why are they seeing this differently than I'm seeing it, right? And so that's what we really try to do with leaders is it gives them the space and grace to become more curious and empathetic, while still holding on to their own and understanding their own values, which is really, really important.
And how do you help leaders to balance that tension between empathy, understanding the other person, but also holding on to their values? How do you help them to balance that tension?
Yeah, it's kind of like, sometimes I'm not really superstitious, but it feels like the kind of the world kind of collided for me a couple of years ago. And I was, working through leadership and developing in the leaders and using different kind of assessments and structures for that. I was really looking for something more quietly in my mind's eye, really about how do I get more in this from a behavioral or cultural values perspective. And I was taking a course at the time and I stumbled across this framework, and it just lit up for me. And it's cultural intelligence, which is really, going with my emotional intelligence background, it's like two sister things. It's like my whole bookend of my life now. These are my two passions. And cultural intelligence is really about how you effectively communicate, navigate the complexities of the diverse workforces that we're working in. And so the framework allows you to understand your motivations, understand your own behavioral values and cultural values. We all have them, regardless of your age and race or gender or positions. We all have a way of working and communicating a preference. But then how do we strategically, now that we understand these things, how do we strategically, create an environment and make decisions knowing what we know, understanding our motivation, understanding, having a knowledge about our own and others' behavioral values? How do we strategically plan out interactions? And then the last piece, which answers your question, is really about what's my action? Right? When do I adopt and when don't I adopt? And there's no real clear answer for that. But what the framework does is allow you to understand your motivation, your understanding, your strategic thinking, and then deciding based on that situation, when do I adopt and not adopt? And if I can give you one quick example of that is I was doing a training session very early on with some very senior leaders, down in Texas. And when we get to the action piece or the adopting piece, this is the really sticky part. People always say, well, I'm the incumbent or I'm the leader. Why do I need to adjust my behavior? And, I had to take a step back and really think this through because at our, we don't believe in pointing fingers and putting people in a box. We feel like, really collaborating and meeting people where they are without any judgment. So I just asked him a couple of questions. I just asked him, does he have a grandparent? Which probably threw him and the whole team off a little bit. And he's like, yeah, I have a grandparent. I'm like, okay, his grandmother, grandfather. I said, my grandmother. I said, is she in good health? He's like, yeah, I think he said she's in her late 80s. She's pretty good health. But she's got some challenges hearing. And I said, okay. I go, so when you speak to your grandmother, how do you speak to her? He said, well, how do you mean? I said, well, do you do anything to ensure that you guys are, that she can hear you, that you guys are in conversation? Like, yeah, of course. Like I slow down my speech, or I speak a little with a little higher volume. I really enunciate my words. I'm really purposeful with my eye contact. And he kept explaining. I was like, mm-hmm. And I never said anything. And it was like this awkward kind of like first date pause that was happening around the between the people. And then he looked at me, he's like, oh, I see what you did there. And I said, look, we adapt our behaviors all the time. If we have small children, if we have an elderly parent or grandparent that we love, that we really want to have a conversation with, we're willing to do things that we may not do for other people. We do this all the time. But then you throw in the lens of an employee or a manager or a customer or a colleague, and then all of a sudden now we feel like we're losing things as we adapt, but we don't lose anything. We're actually gaining things. I'm not asking you to change, how you vote or what you believe in. I'm asking you to have a conversation with someone who doesn't have the same hearing capabilities as you do. And once he looked at it through that lens, his whole mindset around inclusive work and cultural intelligence and all of that really, really fundamentally changed. So hopefully that's a very long-winded answer to your question, but hopefully that helped.
No, no, that was beautiful. And I love the questions you used with this individual to kind of interrupt a thought pattern or a thought process that they had, maybe some assumptions or biases that they had, and have a different kind of a conversation and what transpired as a result. The other thing that's interesting for me as you talk about cultural intelligence It really made me think about earlier in the conversation when you spoke about empathy, because oftentimes people think of empathy as just understanding how people are thinking and feeling, but it also includes responding appropriately. And that cultural intelligence piece really seemed to bridge that gap for me. So I loved hearing that.
Yeah, no, that's great. And thanks for noticing that because that action piece is the last piece of the model, and that's the reason, right? So there's four elements to it. There's your drive, which is your motivation. And so we often ask people to do something, right? Come to a training session, change your behaviors, but what's in it for me? My motivation because I think it can be the right thing to do. Your motivation could be because it's part of my job requirements. You're not wrong. I'm not wrong. It's just different. So, what's my motivation? What am I trying to get out of the situation? Which, when you think about, and frankly, being a Black man, a lot of people think my work is just solely around inclusion work and diversity, and as part of it, but it's really about how we work together. Because I could be on the same team with someone with the same country from me, both from Canada. I'm Black, he's Black, but he's from Vancouver and I'm from Toronto. And the way we communicate, the way we work, the way we make decisions can be vastly different. And so instead of putting that colleague of mine in a box saying, well, he's just difficult, he's not willing to take chances and risks, what this model allows you to do is, well, what's my motivation here? My motivation is I want to work better with this person. Great, that's my CQ drive. Then my knowledge piece, which is the second piece of the model, is what do I understand about my own behavioral and cultural values about the way I want to work? And my colleagues, what don't I understand? So I take the time to understand that. And then I could do the third part, which is your strategic part, with my strategy, which is how am I going to approach this conversation differently the next time? Or structure the way we solve a problem differently, or how we send out a communication in an email form about an announcement or an update. And then the last piece, the action piece, is what people are actually looking for, which is how do I change my behavior? It can be my tone, my speech, how much I smile, use my hands, whatever that means. And so I think that allows people to understand those steps before they go and change. Because what we don't want to do sometimes is be unauthentic. So I could just change for change's sake. I could just say, yeah, we care about everybody, but if nothing in my behavior matches those words, then the authenticity starts to lean into the conversation. And so it allows you to not just go right to that piece and over adapt when you don't have to, or come off unauthentic, but really think about the reasons why I want to adjust my behavior and what am I willing to adjust to, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does. I like how you connected it to authenticity, but I think it
Mm,
raises an important question because we started the conversation talking about lots of change, complexity, people are dealing with a lot. And then you shared, an example of a workshop where you had a conversation with someone that sounded like it was really impactful. And
mm,
oftentimes, as leaders or teams, we go to these really great workshops, we learn something really exciting, we're excited about it.
mm.
Then we get back to our desk, and the pressure of our day-to-day job and all the tasks we have to do comes in.
Yes.
How do you help leaders to sustain these things and make it part of their practice?
Yeah, it's a great question. In part of the work we do talk about biases and bias training. And again, it's not simply towards other people or groups of people. It's around the way we make decisions. And all of us make decisions on an emotional level, even if we think and like to talk that we don't. But we really talk about not just the what biases are and name them and give you a list, because what's the point? But we really talk about the mechanisms of bias, right? And you bring up a great point. We all have biases in us. But what makes biases even worse are really three key things, which is time constraints, which you just mentioned, crunch time. My boss said to me, you got to get something done by 4 o'clock, Carlos. And I know David well. So I'm going to go and work with David because we can collaborate together. I know what to say. He finishes my sentence. And that's fine. I'm not knocking that. But maybe David and Carlos aren't the two best people to make this decision on this ask. Maybe we need to
Okay.
somebody else. But because that time pressure, I'm not going to think about going and reaching out to other people. I need to get this done in 4 hours. And I already had things I planned to do today. So me and David are going to go knock this out. So it affects the quality of our decision making. The other thing is fatigue. I'm going to sound like everyone's mom and dad here, but all of us are burnt out, right? You're driving your kids around to a lot of rep things and dances, and you probably have parents and friends that you want to go to. Maybe you're staying up too late and watching too much Netflix. You're working overtime. Being tired affects that. And the other thing, the most important thing, something I did before we jumped on this call, which is turn off my iPhone watch and turn my phone down, face down, is distractions. We're constantly being distracted. How many of us have been having a conversation like this, whether you consider this a great conversation, I do, or not, where someone's looking at their watch or looking at the text message they got? Like, what's so important that you need to check that now? It's probably not that important. And so those three things really impact the people's ability to deliver to develop those skills. And I'll add even something to that. I just finished a workshop for a client, and a client said to me, Carlos, we love what you've done, and almost any training we've had, we love. The problem that we have is just what you said, David, is your course is done and I'm feeling inspired and motivated, and I go right into another meeting or someone's booked me like literally right in. So I've told people and I've asked organizations to allow their people to be present, to not fill in every nick and cranny of someone's schedule and give them space and grace. Even if you don't know what their meeting is in, don't book that meeting. If they're at 1:30, don't hit them up at 2 o'clock. Give them some time. We need to give our leaders some space and grace to understand what's happening. And you're 100% right. I think the reason why things don't stick, yeah, is it possible Carlos isn't a good facilitator? Absolutely. But maybe it's also because we're not giving these participants the time and space to really think through and develop these skills. And so I implore individuals and organizations to really demand themselves. And I know some organizations who are giving people Amazon gift cards for reducing the amount of meetings in their calendars for just this, because we can't be creative and self-aware if we're constantly booked from morning to night with meetings. We need to find time to be creative, and creativity comes from silence and some space and grace.
Yeah, that is so true. I've actually started challenging some of my clients to, because they're addicted to meetings, create a recurring meeting in their calendar called Space to Lead. And it's to do exactly what you've talked about, space to kind of check in, silence. It's different for everyone how they use that. In some
Sure.
cases, it's a daily meeting because they need that space daily. In others, it's weekly. And if we're at that point where we're having trouble finding the time, I don't think it's a bad strategy to make it part of your schedule, as a starting point for sure. So I love that. I love that.
I love that space to lead in your calendar. That is powerful. That's awesome. That's way better
Yeah.
than
Well, there you
yeah.
go. You can join the Space to Lead
I,
challenge.
I need that
Yeah. Oh,
for
that's
sure.
so great. And gosh, just in just a very short time, we've talked about a whole variety of things. And I feel like each soundbite from you could be an episode just on its own because there's so much rich stuff that you had to share there. How do you sustain this practice in your own world?
Uh, yeah, it's a great question. Barely sometimes. The beauty of doing this work is it allows you to hear yourself speak. Like just now, I said about scheduling and giving yourself space and grace. And as I'm saying it to you, I just realized that I gave myself none of that today, right? And so, we often, do unto others what you want to do to yourself, or whatever that saying is. And so, yeah, it's difficult. I won't lie. I'm a father. I got two young kids. I got a beautiful wife. I have parents and friends that I want to spend time with, and finding the time to do the work can be difficult, but the work itself reminds me of the importance of it. I know we're talking about leadership, so we're probably talking about people in organizations, but I also look at my work as, especially in the world we live in now, unfortunately, in the way conversations in the environment seems to be very much I'm going to speak through you instead of to you. I feel it's really important. What I do is to check myself and my biases in not only with my colleagues and clients in their workplaces, but in my own neighborhood, in my own house, in my son and my daughter's school. Because there's people around us who are not going to see the world like us, but I'm trying to always find that common ground because there usually is. There are some situations where you won't, right? I'm going to be on this side of the aisle and that side, and you're going to be on that side of the aisle. But I think I'm trying to implore us and myself to really try to find the common ground because unfortunately right now it doesn't seem like there's a lot of that. And I think that is seeping into organizations and it's leading to burnout, mental health struggles, frustrations. And I think we could do a much better job of trying to be more curious and empathetic, specifically when you're dealing with something or someone um, that may not be in line with what you're thinking.
So yeah,
Mhm.
no, it did. So true. And I found myself identifying with a lot of what you were sharing, being also a father to 8-year-old twins, busy family life, um, 3 grandkids as well. I don't know how that happened. Yeah, I really identify with what you're saying. So, gosh, I feel bad bringing this conversation to a close, but we probably need to do that.
Sure.
As you think about someone like myself who has a busy coaching practice, leadership practice, young family, lots of stuff going on, what's one tip or trick that you would share just to help someone who maybe is just getting started with creating some of this space that you're talking about?
Yeah, a space for themselves, you mean?
Or just to reflect or become more self-aware, become more empathetic, all these different things that you were introducing
Sure,
into the
sure.
conversation today.
Yeah, I mean, maybe I can. I like to tell. I mean, it's data, but I also think storytelling is important. So maybe I could tell a quick story. I was leading a team of people in my old job, and I had an employee of mine come up to me, and she's very upset because the editorial team, didn't follow her instructions of what her client wanted, and she's going to go over there and give her the business, and often in those situations we want to do it for people or give them a resolution. And I just asked questions and I just said to her, well, what is it that you want? What do you mean? And she's angry. Of course, I want her to write the right article. Look, I know, but what is it that you want? And she's like, I don't know what you're talking about. We asked the client to do something. She won't do it. I just want her to listen to me. And I just kept saying to her, what is it that you want? And she's like, I want her to work with me. And I said, okay, you going over there now and giving her the business, right? Do you really think she's going to work with you after that? What is your relationship going to be like after, right? You have to give yourself a moment. And you can see the blood kind of coming back to her face. And I think for all of us, I would say in this environment, and I'm going to just say it from political stuff all the way down to how you feel about mental health or inclusion or whatever it is what is it that you want? And I mean, if what you want is anarchy and angst and separation, I guess we can continue doing what we're doing. But if you want to be in a place where you feel safe, your kids feel safe, you feel like you can be who you are, you can communicate, you can fail, and still get a chance to succeed. We got to change the way we speak to each other, the way we look at each other, the way we try to solve problems. And right now we have a very narrow view. We're not trying to find the common ground. And so what I would say, long-winded to your question, is the start is really to understand yourself. Why am I feeling the way that I'm feeling? Why am I reacting the way that I'm reacting? And maybe that's cultural intelligence, maybe it's emotional intelligence, maybe it's something else. I'm not sure. But I think if more of us take the time to really self-reflect, to really think about why am I feeling this way, it's probably not the first thing that you're thinking of, right? It's
Mm,
probably not just Justin Trudeau or just a vaccination. It's probably something else. And so if it's that something else, why? And what can I do? And that's where that curious piece for me, I think, is so important, is for us to be curious about others, but about ourselves as well. Hopefully
yeah.
that, I don't know. Hopefully I did.
Absolutely, it does. Curiosity, I love it. So, some curiosity focused internally, understanding ourselves, but also a great tip for us as leaders to get curious about the person sitting across from us. And such a simple question you asked, what is it you want?
What is it you want?
Yeah. The
Yeah.
best answers come from simple questions.
It's really
Yeah.
does. Yeah.
Yeah. Carlos, thank you so much for creating this space for this conversation today. Thoroughly enjoyed the conversation and really looking forward to the next time we get to chat.
You too, David. Thank you so much for having me. And I really had a lot of fun. Hope you did too. Thanks.
If you'd like to learn more about Carlos and the great work that he is doing, you can find him on LinkedIn. And if you'd like to learn about cultural intelligence, or CQ, hop on over to Carlos's website, www.thecqmindset.com. Thank you for joining us on Space to Lead. See you next time.